Margaret Sullivan adjusted her best blouse for the third time, smoothing down the fabric that had seen better days but was clean and pressed with care. She'd bought it 5 years ago for Marcus's college graduation, a pale blue cotton that brought out her eyesore, so the saleswoman at the discount store had said. It was still her nicest top, carefully hand-washed and air-dried after each wearing, treated with the respect reserved for special occasions. The mirror in her small Chicago apartment reflected a woman of 52, whose hands bore the evidence of 20 years scrubbing floors and washing dishes, but whose eyes still sparkled with the joy of a mother celebrating her son's success. She studied her reflection critically, noting the lines around her eyes that had deepened over the years of worry and hard work, the silver threading through her brown hair that she couldn't afford to color at a salon. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight was about Marcus. "This is it, Marcus," she whispered to herself, practicing what she'd say when she saw him. "Senior marketing manager at 28. My baby did it." She picked up the framed photo on her in his cap and gown at Northwestern, his smile bright with possibility and achievement. She'd taken 3 buses to get to that graduation ceremony, arriving 2 hours early to get a good seat, her heart bursting with pride as she watched him walk across that stage. She'd kept every report card, every achievement certificate, every newspaper clipping that mentioned his name. They were stored in a shoebox under her bed, a treasure trove of memories that chronicled his journey from the shy boy who'd clung to her skirts on his first day of kindergarten to the confident young professional he'd become. The phone call had come that morning. "Mom, I got the promotion," Marcus had said, his voice crackling with excitement through her old flip phone. "Senior marketing manager. Can you believe it?" She could believe it. She'd always known he was destined for great things, had seen it. In his determination when he studied late into the night, in his persistence when rejections came, in his unwavering focus on his goals. "We need to celebrate," she'd told him. "Dinner's on me. Anywhere you want." The silence that followed should have warned her. "Well, maybe somewhere nice. I was thinking Giovanni's on Michigan Avenue." Margaret had looked it up online at the library, her heart sinking at the prices, but her determination unwavering. She'd been saving for months, putting aside $5 or $10 from each paycheck when she could, preparing for moments like this. Her son's success was worth any sacrifice. The November air bit at her cheeks as she stepped onto the L platform, clutching her small purse and the congratulations card she'd written and rewritten until the words felt perfect. The train car was nearly empty at this hour, giving her time to think about how proud she was, how all those double shifts at the hotel had been worth it to put Marcus through Northwestern University. She'd chosen Giovanni's because Marcus had mentioned it once. How the partners took clients there, how impressive it was. Margaret had looked it up online at the library, seen the prices that made her stomach flip, but this was a special occasion. Her son had worked so hard, and he deserved to be celebrated somewhere that matched his achievement. The restaurant's warm glow spilled onto Michigan Avenue, and Margaret paused outside, suddenly aware of how her worn coat looked against the polished windows. But Marcus was inside waiting, and nothing could dim her excitement to see his face when she told him how proud she was. Mrs. Sullivan, the hostess, a young woman with kind eyes, greeted her warmly. "Right this way, your son is already seated." Margaret followed her through the restaurant, taking in the soft lighting, the murmur of business conversations, the gleam of expensive silverware. She spotted Marcus at a corner table, looking every inch the successful young executive in his tailored suit, absorbed in his phone. "Marcus, honey," she called out, unable to contain her smile as she approached. He looked up, and for just a moment she saw something flicker across his face. Not quite the joy she'd expected, but something else. Embarrassment, but surely not. This was his mother, the woman who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for his textbooks. "Hi, Mom," he said, standing to give her a brief hug that felt somehow distant. "You look ... nice." "Oh, this old thing?" Margaret laughed, settling into her chair. "I wanted to look presentable for my successful son, senior marketing manager. I still can't believe it." Marcus glanced around the restaurant quickly, then leaned forward slightly. "Mom, maybe we could keep our voices down a little. This is a pretty upscale place." "Of course, sweetheart," Margaret said, lowering her voice but not her enthusiasm. "I'm just so proud of you. All those years of studying, all those late-night sits, all paying off." The waitress approached a girl who couldn't be much older than 25 with tired eyes but a genuine smile. "Good evening, I'm Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" "I'll have the house red," Marcus said curtly, barely looking up from his menu. Margaret turned to Sarah with a warm smile. "Could I have a coffee, dear? And might I ask, have you been working long tonight? You look like you could use a break." Sarah's face brightened immediately. Actually, yes, it's been a long shift. Thank you for asking. Most people don't. I'll get your coffee right away. And it's the good stuff, not the regular brew. That's very sweet of you, honey. What's your name again? Sarah Chen. Well, Sarah Chen, you're doing a wonderful job. I used to waitress myself years ago. It's hard work, and good service like yours doesn't go unnoticed. As Sarah walked away with a spring in her step, Margaret turned back to Marcus, who was staring at his menu with what looked like forced concentration. She seems like a sweet girl, Margaret said. Reminds me of myself at that age, working at Murphy's Diner to save up for your college fund. Mom, Marcus said quietly, you don't need to. Share your whole life story with the waitstaff. Margaret felt a small sting but pushed it aside. I'm just being friendly, sweetheart. It never hurts to be kind. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I know, Mom. It's just different here than Murphy's Diner. The words hung in the air between them, and Margaret felt something cold settle in her chest, but she forced a smile, determined not to let anything dampen the celebration. So tell me everything about the promotion, she said, leaning forward with genuine interest. What will your new responsibilities be? Marcus's expressions softened slightly as he talked about his new role, the team he'd be managing, the projects he'd oversee. Margaret listened intently, asking questions that showed she understood more about business than he sometimes gave her credit for. She'd always been smart. Circumstances had just never given her the chance to prove it in a boardroom. And the salary increase, Marcus was saying, it's substantial. I'll finally be able to afford a place in Lincoln Park, maybe even start looking at condos. Oh, Marcus, that's wonderful. You've worked so hard for this. Sarah returned with their drinks and a small plate of bread. This is complimentary, she said, but I brought you the good olive oil instead of butter. You mentioned you used to waitress. I thought you might appreciate the upgrade. Margaret's face lit up. Aren't you just the sweetest thing? Thank you so much, Sarah. Mom, Marcus said under his breath, but Margaret was already engaging Sarah in conversation. How long have you been working here, dear? About 2 years now? I'm actually in nursing school. Just finished my clinicals last month. This job helps pay for it. Nursing, what a noble profession. My mother was a nurse during the war. She always said it was the most important work she ever did. Sarah's eyes shone. Really? That's amazing. It's tough sometimes, but I love helping people. You have a good heart, Sarah. The world needs more people like you. Marcus cleared his throat loudly. We should probably order soon. They're pretty busy tonight. Sarah took the hint and pulled out her notepad, but Margaret could see the disappointment in the young woman's eyes at having their conversation cut short. It made Margaret's heart ache a little. After they ordered, Marcus choosing the most expensive steak on the menu. Without looking at the price, Margaret opting for the salmon. After calculating quickly in her head, Marcus leaned back in his chair. With a sigh, so he said, how's work going for you? Oh, you know, same as always. Mrs. Henderson at the hotel is retiring next month, so I might get promoted to head of housekeeping. It would mean a little more money, and I could use it too. Maybe take that computer class at the community college. That's good, Mom. Margaret sensed something in his tone but couldn't quite place it. I know it's not as exciting as your promotion, but it's fine, Mom. It's just ... Marcus paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Sometimes I wonder, if you're really pushing yourself, you know, there are opportunities out there if you look for them. The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. She set down her coffee cup carefully, her hands suddenly unsteady. Pushing myself, she repeated quietly. I just mean, you're smart, Mom. You could do more than housekeeping if you really tried. Maybe take some classes, learn some skills. The world has changed a lot since you were my age. Margaret stared at her son, seeing a stranger in the tailored suit and perfect haircut. Marcus, I've been pushing myself since the day you were born. I worked 3 jobs to put you through college. I went without so you could have everything you needed. I know that, and I'm grateful. But what? But I embarrass you? The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked away, and in that moment, Margaret knew she'd hit the truth he hadn't been willing to say. Mom, it's not that simple. Actually, it is that simple. Margaret's voice was steady now, though her heart was breaking. You're ashamed. Of me? I'm not ashamed of you. We move in different circles now, and sometimes your mother, who cleaned hotel rooms to pay for your education, doesn't fit into your new world. Marcus's face flushed red. Mom, please don't make this dramatic. Margaret laughed, but there was no humor in it. Marcus, I wore my best outfit tonight to celebrate with you. I chose this restaurant because I thought it would make you happy. I saved for 2 months to afford this dinner. You didn't have to. Yes, I did, because I love you. Because I'm proud of you. Because I thought you'd want to share this moment with the person who sacrificed everything to make it possible. Marcus looked around the restaurant nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. Mom, people are looking. Let them look, Margaret said, her voice gaining strength. I'm not ashamed of who I am or what I've done. I'm proud of my work. I'm proud of raising a son who became successful. I just wish she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I just wish you were proud of me too. Sarah appeared beside their table with their meals, clearly sensing the tension but maintaining her professional smile. Here we are, Simon for you, ma'am, and the ribeye for you, sir. Can I get you anything else? Actually, Margaret said, standing slowly, could you tell me where the restroom is? Of course, right down that hallway and to the left. Thank you, dear. Margaret turned to Marcus, who was staring at his plate. I'll be right back. But as she walked toward the restroom, Margaret felt something breaking inside her chest. The woman who had worked her fingers raw, who had gone without new clothes for years, who had never once complained about the sacrifices, that woman suddenly felt very small and very tired in the restroom mirror. She saw herself as Marcus must see her, middle-aged, wearing a blouse from Target, hands that showed every hour of hard work. For the first time in years, Margaret Sullivan felt truly ashamed of herself, and that realization hurt more than anything. Her son had said Margaret stood in the restroom for longer than necessary, staring at her reflection and trying to compose herself. The face looking back at her was the same one that had smiled through 18 years of single motherhood. The same one that had beamed with pride at Marcus's graduation. The same one that had never once regretted the choices she'd made for her son's future. She thought about those early years, when Marcus was small and she was working 3 jobs just to keep their tiny apartment. She'd clean office buildings at night, waitress during the day, and take in ironing in the evenings while Marcus did his homework at the kitchen table. Some nights she'd fall asleep in her chair while he worked, exhausted from the constant hustle to make ends meet. But even then, even when she was so tired she could barely stand, she'd made sure he had what he needed. School supplies, decent clothes, lunch money. She'd attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every award ceremony. She'd helped with homework even when she didn't understand it herself. Sitting beside him at that wobbly kitchen table and learning alongside him when Marcus was in high school and needed a computer for his classes, Margaret had worked extra shifts for 3 months to save the money. When he wanted to take SAT prep classes, she'd picked up weekend cleaning jobs. When he applied to Northwestern, she'd worked overtime for 6 months to pay the application fees and campus visit expenses. Every choice, every sacrifice, every extra hour of work had been about giving Marcus opportunities she'd never had. And now, in the harsh lighting of Giovanni's upscale restroom, surrounded by marble and gold fixtures that probably cost more than her monthly rent, she felt every one of her 52 years weighing on her shoulders. A younger woman emerged from one of the stalls, beautifully dressed, probably in her 30s, with perfectly styled hair and jewelry that caught the light. She nodded politely at Margaret before washing her hands with expensive soap from a crystal dispenser. Excuse me, the woman said suddenly, her voice cultured and kind. I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I was seated near your table, and I couldn't help but notice you talking with the waitress earlier. It was so refreshing to see someone treat service staff with such genuine kindness. Margaret managed a weak smile. Oh, that's just ... That's just who I am, I suppose. Well, it's beautiful. My grandmother was the same way. She believed everyone deserved respect and kindness regardless of their job or circumstances. It's a rare quality these days. The woman finished drying her hands and turned to leave, then paused. Your son is very lucky to have a mother who raised him with such values. After the woman left, Margaret felt tears threatening again. If only Marcus could see what this stranger saw. If only he understood that kindness wasn't something to be embarrassed by, it was something to be proud of. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked back to the table. Marcus was cutting his steak, not looking up when she sat down. Everything okay? He asked without meeting her eyes. Fine, Margaret said quietly, picking up her fork. The salmon was perfectly prepared, probably the best meal she'd had in months, but it tasted like ash in her mouth. They ate in relative silence for several minutes, the weight of their earlier conversation hanging between them like a wall. Margaret kept glancing at her son, searching for some sign of the boy who used to run to her with scraped knees and broken toys, trusting her to make everything better. Mom, Marcus finally said, his voice carefully controlled, I want you to know that I do appreciate everything you've done for me. Margaret set down her fork. But I'm building a career now. I have colleagues, clients, people I need to impress. And sometimes, ... double quotes, sometimes I don't fit that image. Marcus looked up at her then, and she saw something in his eyes, maybe, or frustration. It's not about fitting an image. It's about ... professionalism. about understanding different environments. And you think I don't understand professionalism? I think you're used to a different kind of environment. More casual, more ... personal. Margaret felt the words like individual cuts. More working class, you mean? That's not what I said, but it's what you meant. Margaret leaned forward slightly. Marcus, do you think kindness is unprofessional? Do you think treating people with respect makes someone less worthy of respect themselves? Of course not. But then, what exactly is it about me that embarrasses you? Is it my clothes? My job? The fact that I didn't go to college? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mom, you're twisting my words. No, I'm trying to understand them. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're ashamed of the woman who worked herself to the bone to give you opportunities she never had. That's not fair, isn't it? Margaret's voice remained steady, but there was steel in it now. You know what's not fair, Marcus? What's not fair is that I spent 20 years putting your needs before my own. And now that you've succeeded, you see me as a liability instead of the foundation that made your success possible. Marcus looked around the restaurant again, his discomfort obvious. Mom, please, people can hear us. You keep saying that. You keep worrying about what people think. But let me ask you something. When you were 8 years old and got pneumonia, did you care what people thought when I held you all night in the emergency room? Margaret's voice was gaining strength as the memories flooded back. She remembered that terrifying night, watching Marcus struggle to breathe, his fever spiking dangerously high. She'd carried him 4 blocks to the emergency room because she couldn't afford a taxi, then sat with him for 14 hours while doctors worked to stabilize his breathing. She'd sung to him, held his hand, refused to leave his side even when the nurses suggested she go home and rest. That's different. When you were in high school and got suspended for fighting, did you care what people thought when I went to the principal's office and fought for you? She remembered that day to Marcus coming home with a black eye and a suspension notice, explaining that he'd been defending a smaller kid from bullies. Margaret had taken a day off work, losing pay she couldn't afford to lose, and marched into that principal's office. She'd argued passionately for her son, explaining his character, his values, why he'd acted the way he did. She'd convinced them to reduce his suspension and ensure the bullying was addressed. Mom, when you needed money for your senior trip, your class ring, your graduation suit, did you care what people thought when I worked extra shifts to make sure you had everything the other kids had? The senior trip to Washington, D.C. had cost $300 money Margaret didn't have. She'd worked double shifts for 2 weeks, cleaning offices until midnight and starting again at 6 in the morning. Her back had ached for months afterward, but seeing Marcus's excitement about the trip had made every hour worthwhile. The class ring had been another challenge. All the other kids were getting them, and Marcus had tried to hide his disappointment when he thought they couldn't afford it. Margaret had sold her grandmother's jewelry, the only valuable thing she owned, to buy that ring. She'd never told Marcus what she'd sacrificed for it, and the graduation suit she'd taken him to 3 different stores, comparing prices, making sure he looked as good as any of his classmates when he walked across that stage. She'd worn the same dress to his graduation that she'd worn to his 8th grade promotion ceremony. But Marcus had looked perfect. Marcus was staring at his plate now, his jaw clenched tight. I was grateful for all of that. Were you? Or were you just waiting until you didn't need me anymore so you could be embarrassed by me without consequences? The accusation hung in the air between them, brutal in its honesty. Margaret immediately regretted the harshness of her words, but she couldn't take them back. And maybe, she thought, they needed to be said. That's not ... Marcus started, then stopped. He looked up at her, and for a moment she saw the boy he used to be, uncertain, vulnerable, needing his mother's guidance. Mom, I never wanted you to feel ... To feel what? Worthless? Ashamed? Like I'm something you need to hide from your new life. You're not worthless, Marcus said quickly. You're my mother. Yes, I am. I'm the mother who chose you over every opportunity I might have had. I'm the mother who worked jobs that destroyed my body so you could have a career that uses your mind. I'm the mother who celebrated every achievement of yours as if it were my own, because it was. Your success is my success, Marcus. Everything you've accomplished, I helped build. Marcus sat back in his chair looking overwhelmed. I know that, Mom. I do. Do you? Because tonight, sitting here with you, I feel like you see me as some kind of embarrassment you have to manage rather than the person who made your dreams possible. Sarah appeared at their table again, clearly hesitant to interrupt but needing to check on them. How is everything tasting? Can I get you anything else? Margaret looked up at the young woman, this nursing student working her way through school. Just like Margaret had worked her way through raising a child, and felt a surge of protective warmth. Everything is delicious, Sarah. You're doing a wonderful job. Thank you so much. That really means a lot. Marcus cleared his throat. Actually, could we get the check when you have a chance? Sarah nodded and walked away, but not before giving Margaret a grateful smile that made her heart ache. This young woman appreciated her kindness, valued her words. Her own son seemed to see them as a source of shame. I want to pay, Margaret said quietly. Mom, no. This was my invitation, and this is my choice. Margaret reached for her purse. I can afford to buy my son dinner to celebrate his promotion. Despite what you might think, I'm not completely helpless. I never said you were helpless. You didn't have to say it. Margaret pulled out her credit card, the one she'd gotten specifically for emergencies and special occasions like this. Your attitude said it for you. They sat in silence until Sarah returned with a check. Margaret handed over her card before Marcus could protest. This success story she'd made possible. This stranger who seemed ashamed to be seen with her. Marcus, she said softly, I want you to be happy. I want you to succeed. Not because you should feel guilty, but because it's part of who you are. The values I taught you, the work ethic I showed you, the compassion I tried to instill in you, those things don't become liabilities just because you wear expensive suits now. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her for the first time all evening. Mom, I love you, Margaret continued. I will always love you, but I won't apologize for who I am or how I raised you. I won't pretend to be someone else to make you more comfortable in your new world. The words hung between them as Sarah returned with the receipt. Margaret signed it carefully, adding a generous tip that she knew would make a difference in the young woman's life. As they prepared to leave, Margaret felt a profound sadness settling over her. This wasn't how she'd imagined this evening would end. She'd pictured laughter stories, dreams shared between a mother and son who had achieved something remarkable together. Instead, she felt like she was saying goodbye to someone she barely recognized. Margaret stood slowly from her chair, her movements deliberate and dignified despite the emotional turmoil churning inside her. The elegant dining room of Giovanni's buzzed with the quiet conversations of business deals and romantic dinners, but she felt utterly alone despite being surrounded by people. Mom, wait, Marcus said, rising quickly from his seat. I think we should talk about this more. But underneath it, what is there to talk about, Marcus? She asked quietly. You've made your feelings quite clear. I haven't made anything clear. You're putting words in my mouth, am I? Margaret adjusted her purse strap on her shoulder. A gesture Marcus recognized from his childhood IT meant she was gathering her strength, preparing to do something difficult. Then tell me, son. Tell me exactly how you feel about your mother. Marcus glanced around the restaurant again, that habitual check to see who might be watching. Mom, this isn't the place. There's never going to be the right place, is there? Margaret's voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable finality to it. Because the place isn't the problem. I am. That's not true. Then prove it. Margaret took a step closer to him. Prove it by telling everyone in this restaurant that you're proud of your mother. Prove it by introducing me to your colleagues when you see them. Prove it by not checking over your shoulder every time I speak to someone like Sarah, afraid that I'm going to embarrass you. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The silence stretched between them, confirming everything Margaret had suspected but hoped wasn't true. I thought so, she said softly. You know what, Marcus? I came here tonight to celebrate. You too. Celebrate us. To celebrate everything we've built together, but I realize now that there is no us anymore. There's just you and there's your mother, who doesn't fit into your new life. Mom, please don't do this. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. Margaret felt something inside her chest, snap not break, but snap back into place, like a spine straightening after being bent too long. Make this bigger than it needs to be, she repeated. Marcus, this is as big as it gets. This is about respect. This is about love. This is about whether the person I raised to be a good man still exists underneath all that expensive fabric and career ambition. Marcus's face flushed red. You're being dramatic again, and you're being cruel. Maybe not intentionally, but you're being cruel. Margaret reached out and touched his arm gently. I love you, son. I will always love you. But I won't stand here and let you treat me like I'm something to be ashamed of. She turned to walk away, but Marcus caught her arm. Mom, don't go, please. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings, but you're overreacting. Margaret looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. Overreacting, she repeated slowly. Marcus, let me ask you something. If one of your colleagues spoke to their assistant the way you've spoken to me tonight, what would you think of them? That's different. How is it different? I deserve better treatment than a stranger would get, not worse. Margaret gently removed his hand from her arm. And the fact that you think being your mother somehow means I deserve less respect rather than more tells me everything. I need to know about how far you've drifted from the values I tried to teach you." She turned again to leave, her heart breaking. With every step, behind her, she could hear Marcus saying something, but she didn't turn back. She couldn't, and she needed to hold on to what was left of her dignity. Margaret made it halfway across the restaurant before she heard a voice that stopped her in her tracks. "Margaret." Margaret Sullivan. She turned, confused, to see a tall man in chef's whites, standing near the kitchen doors. He was probably in his early 40s, with graying hair and kind eyes, but she didn't recognize him immediately. "I'm sorry," she said politely. "Do we know each other?" The man walked toward her, and suddenly the entire restaurant seemed to quiet down. Other diners turned to look, sensing that something significant was happening but not sure what. "We do know each other," the man said, his voice carrying easily across the Nassalent dining room, "though it's been almost 15 years and I look quite different now." Margaret studied his face, searching her memory. There was something familiar about his eyes, something that tugged at a memory she couldn't quite place. "I'm Antonio Rivera," he said, extending his hand. "But when you knew me, I was Tony, the homeless guy who used to sleep behind Murphy's diner." Margaret's breath caught in her throat. "Tony, you remember?" His smile was warm and genuine. "I wasn't sure you would. I was ... in pretty rough shape back then." The memories came flooding back. A young man, probably in his mid-20s then, who had been living on the streets during one of Chicago's harshest winters. Margaret had been working at Murphy's diner, pulling the late shift because it paid $1 more per hour, and she'd often see him huddled behind the building when she took out the trash. At first, she'd been afraid a woman alone late at night, encountering a stranger in the alley, but something about him had seemed so young, so lost. She'd started bringing him leftover food from the diner soup that would have been thrown away. Day-old bread, coffee that was still warm. She'd leave it by the dumpster where he couldn't miss it, never making a big deal of it, never making him feel like charity. It had become a routine. Margaret would work her shift, and before heading home, she'd package up whatever food was available and leave it where Tony could find it. Sometimes she'd see him from the kitchen window, gratefully eating what she'd left. Other times, the food would simply be gone by morning, and she'd know he'd been there. She'd learned bits and pieces of his story over those weeks. Tony had been a culinary student once, working toward his degree when addiction had derailed his life. His family had given up on him, his friends had disappeared, and he'd ended up on the streets with nothing but the clothes on his back and a drug habit that consumed everything else. But Margaret had seen something in his eyes, a spark of intelligence, a flicker of hope that hadn't been completely extinguished, even in his worst moments when he was shaking from withdrawal or barely coherent from whatever he'd taken to numb the pain. She'd treated him with dignity. "Oh my goodness," Margaret whispered Tony, "but you look ... different." He laughed, and the sound was rich and warm, nothing like the hollow voice she remembered from those desperate nights behind the diner. "That's what steady meals and a purpose in life will do for you." She could hardly believe the transformation. The gaunt, hollow-eyed young man she'd known had become this confident, successful chef. His skin was healthy now, his eyes bright and clear, his entire presence radiating the kind of contentment that comes from finding your place in the world. By now, the entire restaurant was listening. Margaret could see Marcus from the corner of her eye, standing frozen by their table, but her attention was completely focused on the man in front of her. "I don't understand," she said. "You're the chef here." "I'm the executive chef and owner," Antonio said proudly. "Giovanni's is my restaurant." Though I kept the name the original owner used, seemed like good luck, since this place is where my life really began to turn around. Margaret shook her head in amazement. "But Tony, you were ... how did you?" "How did I go from sleeping behind Murphy's diner to owning one of Chicago's top restaurants?" Antonio's voice carried clearly through the silent dining room. "Because of you, Margaret. Because of what you did for me. What I did. Tony, I didn't do anything special. I just ... You saved my life." Antonio's voice was firm, certain. "Do you remember that night in February? It was brutally cold, below zero with the wind chill. You found me behind the diner, and I was in bad shape. Hypothermic, barely conscious." The memory hit Margaret like a physical force. She remembered that night coming out to empty the trash, and finding Tony collapsed in the snow, his lips blue, his body shaking uncontrollably. "You could have just called 911 and gone back inside where it was warm," Antonio continued. "Instead, you stayed with me. You wrapped me in your own coat, held me to keep me warm until the paramedics arrived. And then, this is the part that changed everything, you rode with me to the hospital." Margaret felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. "You were so young. I couldn't just leave you alone, but you did more than that. You stayed with me for 3 days while I recovered. You brought me food, real food, not hospital food. You talked to me like I was a human being. Instead of just another homeless addict, you made me remember that I was worth something." The restaurant was completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to listen, forming a semicircle around Margaret and Antonio. "And when I got out of the hospital," Antonio continued, "you didn't just wish me luck and forget about me. You got me a job washing dishes at Murphy's. You vouched for me when nobody else would. You made sure I had a chance." Margaret wiped at her eyes. "You worked so hard, Tony. You were there every day, never complained, always willing to learn because you believed in me. Because for the first time in years, someone looked at me and saw potential instead of just a problem." Antonio turned slightly to address the entire restaurant. "This woman, Margaret Sullivan, she didn't just save my life that night in the snow. She gave me back my future." He turned back to Margaret, his eyes bright with emotion. "After Murphy's, I went to culinary school, worked my way up through kitchens all over the city. Started this place 5 years ago. And every single day, every single success I've had, I've thought about the woman who made it possible." Margaret was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the recognition, by seeing what Tony had become, by the realization that her small act of kindness had grown into something so much larger than she'd ever imagined. "I've been looking for you for years," Antonio said softly. "I wanted to thank you properly. I wanted to tell you what you meant to me. I never expected you to walk into my restaurant." "Tony," Margaret whispered, "I'm so proud of you. Look at what you've built. Look at what you've become. Look at what we built," he corrected. "None of this would exist without your kindness. Without your faith in a broken young man that everyone else had given up on." Antonio suddenly turned toward the kitchen and called out, "Maria, bring out the special window, good stuff." A woman emerged from the kitchen carrying a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than Margaret made in a month. Tonight, Antonio announced to the entire restaurant, "Dinner is on the house for everyone, in honor of Margaret Sullivan, the woman who proves that kindness can change the world." The restaurant erupted in applause. People stood from there, tables clapping and smiling at Margaret, who stood in the center of it all, feeling simultaneously overwhelmed and vindicated. Through the applause and celebration, Margaret's eyes found Marcus still standing by their table, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and something else. Something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Antonio followed her gaze, and, for the first time, seemed to notice Marcus. "Is that your son?" he asked quietly. Margaret nodded, unable to trust her voice. "Would you like to introduce us?" Margaret looked at Marcus, this young man she'd raised, this successful executive who had been embarrassed by her just minutes before. He was staring at her now with something that looked like AOA, as if he was seeing her for the first time. "Yes," she said softly. "I would." Marcus stood frozen as his mother walked toward him, accompanied by the chef who had just revealed a story that shattered everything Marcus thought he knew about the woman who raised him. The applause was dying down, but the entire restaurant remained focused on their table, waiting to see what would happen next. "Marcus," Margaret said quietly when she reached him, "I'd like you to meet Antonio Rivera." "Tony, this is my son, Marcus." Antonio extended his hand with a warm smile. "It's an honor to meet you, Marcus. Your mother has told me so much about you. Over the years, how proud she is, how hard you've worked, how much you've accomplished." Marcus shook Antonio's hand automatically, his mind reeling. "Over the years," he managed to ask. "Your mother and I have kept in touch," Antonio explained. "Christmas cards, the occasional email. She's never stopped bragging about you, your graduation, your first job, every promotion. She carries a picture of you in her wallet that she shows to anyone who Marcus looked at his mother, seeing her with completely different eyes. The woman he'd been embarrassed by just minutes ago, the woman he'd thought was too simple, too working class for his new world, had been carrying his picture, bragging about his achievements to a man who owned one of Chicago's most successful restaurants. "I don't understand," Marcus said weakly. "Mom, you never mentioned ... There were a lot of things I never mentioned," Margaret said softly. "I didn't think you'd be interested in stories about my work friends or the people I've helped over the years." Antonio studied Marcus's face, and something in his expression suggested he was beginning to understand the dynamic he'd walked into. "Marcus, may I ask what you do for a living?" "I'm a senior marketing manager at Hartwell & Associates," Marcus replied, still feeling off balance. "Impressive. That's a top firm. You should be very proud." Antonio glanced at Margaret, then back at Marcus. "And I'm sure you know how proud your mother is of you. She talks about you the way I talk about my signature dishes, with pure love and complete pride." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He looked at his mother, really looked at her, and suddenly saw everything differently. Her worn but carefully pressed clothing wasn't shabby, it was dignified. Her friendly conversation, With the waitstaff wasn't embarrassing, it was compassionate. Her obvious pride in him wasn't something to manage, it was a gift he'd been taking for granted. "Mr. Rivera," Marcus said slowly, "the story you just told about my mother saving your life, every word of it is true. And please, call me Antonio." He looked at Margaret with genuine affection. "Your mother is one of the most remarkable people I've ever known. She has this incredible ability to see the potential in people when everyone else has given up on them." Marcus felt something crumbling inside his chestnut, his heart breaking, but the walls he'd built around it, the barriers he'd erected between who he was now and where he came from. He thought about all the times over the years when his mother had mentioned people from her work, stories about colleagues and customers and encounters that he'd dismissed as unimportant small talk. How many other lives had she touched? How many other people had she helped in ways he'd never known about? He realized that in his rush to distance himself from what he saw as her simple, small world, he'd missed the profound impact she'd had on the people around her. "She never told me," he whispered, and the words came out broken, full of the weight of realization. "That's because your mother doesn't help people for recognition," Antonio said gently. "She helps them because it's who she is. Do you know how many people she's touched over the years? How many lives she's changed? With simple acts of kindness." Marcus looked at his mother, who was standing quietly, letting Antonio speak for her. There were tears in her eyes, but also a dignity that Marcus was seeing clearly for the first time all evening. He thought about the waitress, Sarah, and how his mother had immediately connected with her. Asked about her life, treated her like a person rather than just service staff. That wasn't embarrassing behavior, that was extraordinary behavior. That was the kind of human connection that most people in his professional world had forgotten how to make. They were so busy networking and positioning themselves that they'd lost the ability to simply see other people as fellow human beings, deserving of respect and kindness. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly, "I had no idea." "You weren't supposed to have an idea," Margaret replied softly. "I didn't do any of it for credit or recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do." And there it was. Fundamental difference between his mother's values and the values he'd absorbed in his climb up the corporate ladder. She helped people because it was right. He'd started evaluating people based on what they could do for him. She saw potential in everyone. He'd started seeing people as assets or liabilities. The woman he'd been embarrassed by was actually the kind of person he'd been taught to emulate in business school, someone who could inspire loyalty, who could see potential where others saw problems, who could build relationships based on trust and genuine care. The difference was that she did it naturally, authentically, because it was who she was, not because it was a strategic advantage. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly, "I had no idea." "You weren't supposed to have an idea," Margaret replied softly. "I didn't do any of it for credit or recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Antonio excused himself quietly, sensing that mother and son needed privacy, but not before squeezing Margaret's shoulder and saying, "You'll always have a table here, Margaret, always." As Antonio walked away, Marcus and Margaret found themselves alone again, but the entire context of their relationship had shifted. The other diners had returned to their conversations, but there was still an energy in the air, a sense that something significant had just occurred. "Mom," Marcus said, sinking back into his chair, "I owe you an apology, a huge apology." Margaret sat down across from him, the same woman who had been there all evening, but Marcus was finally seeing her clearly. "Marcus, you don't need to apologize." Yes, I do." Marcus leaned forward, his voice urgent. "Mom, I need to apologize for everything, for being embarrassed by you, for caring more about what strangers think than about the woman who sacrificed everything for me, for forgetting who I am and where I came from." Margaret's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she remained silent, letting her son speak. "I was so caught up in my new world, my new success, that I started seeing you through their eyes instead of through my own." Marcus's voice was thick with emotion. "I forgot that every opportunity I've had, every door that's opened for me, was built on the foundation of your hard work and sacrifice." "Marcus, no, Mom, please let me finish." Marcus reached across the table and took her worn hands in his smooth ones. "What Antonio just told everyone about you saving his life, about you believing in him when no one else would, that's not unusual for you, is it? That's just who you are." Margaret shook her head slightly. "I just try to help when I can, but it's more than that. You see, people really see them. You saw potential in a homeless young man when everyone else saw a problem. You see dignity in a nursing student working her way through school when other people just see someone serving their food. You've always seen the best in people." Marcus's voice cracked. "And tonight, I was so worried about how you might look. 2 other people that I forgot to see you at all. Sweetheart, you're being too hard on yourself, am I? Marcus looked around the restaurant where other diners were still occasionally glancing their way with expressions of respect and curiosity. Mom, do you know what happened here tonight? Do you understand what just occurred? Margaret looked confused. Tony recognized me, and, no, Mom, what happened? Is that a room full of successful, wealthy, influential people just witnessed something extraordinary? They saw a woman being honored not for her money or her status or her connections, but for her character, for her kindness, for the lives she's touched through simple human decency. Marcus squeezed her hands tighter. They saw you, Mom. They saw who you really are, and they were impressed. Not despite your background, but because of what you've done with your life, how you've treated people, how you've made a difference. Margaret was crying openly now, and Marcus felt his own eyes filling with tears. I spent all evening worried about how you might embarrass me, Marcus continued, when I should have been worried about how I was embarrassing you. You're the most respected person in this room right now, Mom. Not because of what you own or where you went to school, but because of who you are. Marcus, I never wanted you to feel what proud, because that's what I should feel. That's what I do feel now. Marcus stood up and walked around the table, pulling his mother to her feet and embracing her tightly. I'm proud of you, Mom. I'm proud of your kindness, your strength, your generosity. I'm proud that you raised me to be successful, and I'm ashamed that I forgot to also be kind. Margaret held her son close, feeling years of hurt and worry melting away. You are kind, Marcus. You've always been kind. You just lost your way a little bit. I lost more than my way, Mom. I lost sight of what actually matters. Marcus pulled back to look at her face. Success without character is worthless. Wealth without compassion is empty. I've been so focused on climbing the ladder that I forgot to look down and make sure I was still connected to the people who helped me get there. Sarah, the waitress, approached their table hesitantly. I'm so sorry to interrupt, she said, but Antonio asked me to give you this. She handed Margaret an envelope with her name written on it in elegant handwriting. Margaret opened it carefully and pulled out a letter. As she read, her eyes widened with surprise. What is it, Mom? Margaret looked up at Marcus, then at Sarah, then back at the letter. It's a job offer. Antonio is asking if I'd like to work here as a hostess. He says he needs someone who understands hospitality from the heart, not just as a business. Sarah smiled widely. He told me to tell you that the position comes with full benefits, including tuition assistance if you want to take those computer classes you mentioned. Marcus felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly knocked him over. Mom, that's incredible. You should take it. I don't know, Margaret said uncertainly. I've been at the hotel for so long, and this is so different. Different how? Mom, this is perfect for you. You love people, you're naturally gracious, and you have this gift for making everyone feel welcomed and valued. This job was made for you. Margaret looked around the restaurant, the elegant decor, the well-dressed clientele, the atmosphere of success and sophistication that had intimidated her earlier in the evening. But what if I don't fit in? What if I'm not elegant enough, or educated enough, or Mom? Marcus took her hands again. Look around this room. Every single person here just witnessed something extraordinary. They saw a successful businessman honor a woman not for her wealth or status, but for her character. They saw you being celebrated for exactly who you are. He gestured toward the other diners, many of whom were still watching them with warm smiles. Do you think any of these people are looking at you right now and thinking you don't belong? Or do you think they're looking at you and seeing someone they respect? Margaret glanced around the room and was surprised to see nodding heads, encouraging smiles, and even a few thumbs up from strangers who had been moved by Antonio's story. They see what I should have seen all along, Marcus continued. They see a woman of substance, a woman of character, a woman who makes the world better simply by being herself. Sarah cleared her throat gently. If I may, she said, I've worked here for 2 years, and I've never seen Antonio react to anyone the way he reacted to you. He's a good man and a fair boss, but he's also very particular about who he hires. The fact that he offered you a job, after one conversation, tells you everything you need to know about how much he respects you. Margaret looked at the letter again, reading the details of the position. The salary that was more than she'd ever made, the benefits that would change her life. Health insurance, real health insurance, not the basic coverage she'd been struggling with. Dental coverage, a retirement plan, things she'd never dared to hope for. The position itself sounded perfect for her greeting guests, making them feel welcomed, coordinating with the kitchen and serving staff to ensure every dining experience was exceptional. It was exactly the kind of work she'd been doing informally her entire life, but now it would be recognized, valued, compensated properly. "What do you think I should do?" she asked Marcus. "I think you should do whatever makes you happy," Marcus replied. And she could hear the sincerity in his voice, the respect that had been missing earlier in the evening. "But I also think you should stop underestimating yourself. You've spent your whole life believing in other people, me, in Tony, in everyone you've ever helped. Maybe it's time to believe in yourself." Marcus paused, then continued with growing conviction. "Mom, you're exactly what this restaurant needs. You're what every business needs, someone who genuinely cares about people, who can make anyone feel valued and important. Antonio didn't offer you this job out of nostalgia or charity. He offered it because he's a smart businessman who recognizes talent when he sees it." Margaret felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. The sense that she was valued not just for what she could sacrifice for others, but for what she could contribute in her own right. "You know what? I think I will take it. I think it's time for a new adventure." The words surprised her as she said them. She'd been so focused on stability, on just getting by, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to look forward to something new, something challenging, something that might actually fulfill her rather than just sustain her. Marcus felt a rush of joy and pride that made him want to shout. Instead, he pulled his mother into another fierce hug, holding her close and marveling at how strong she felt, how resilient. This woman had weathered every storm life had thrown at her and had somehow emerged with her kindness intact, her spirit unbroken. "I'm so proud of you, Mom, and I'm so sorry it took me this long to say it. I'm proud of you too, sweetheart. I always have been, and I always will be." As they held each other, Marcus felt something shift inside him, a realignment of his values, a reconnection with the person his mother had raised him to be. Success was important, but it was meaningless without the foundation of character, kindness, and connection that his mother had always embodied. He thought about his colleagues at work, about the way they talked about their families, their backgrounds, their histories. Some of them spoke with embarrassment about their origins, as if success required erasing where they came from. Others spoke with condescension about people who hadn't achieved their level of professional advancement, as if career success was the only measure of human worth. But sitting here with his mother, Marcus realized how backwards that thinking was. The qualities that made someone truly successful: integrity, compassion, resilience, the ability to inspire others, those weren't things you learned in business school or developed in corporate boardrooms. They were things you learned from people like his mother, who had faced real challenges and emerged with their humanity intact. "Mom," he said softly, "would you like to come to my office next week? I'd love to introduce you to my colleagues. I want them to meet the woman who taught me everything I know about treating people with respect." Margaret pulled back to look at him, her eyes shining with joy and pride. The invitation meant more to her than he could possibly know, not because she needed his professional world's approval, but because it meant her son was no longer ashamed of who she was. "I would love that, Marcus. I would absolutely love that." She imagined walking into his office building, meeting the people he worked with, seeing the environment where he spent his days. She pictured herself not as an embarrassment to be managed, but as a mother to be introduced with pride as they prepared to leave Giovanni's that night. Marcus realized that his mother hadn't embarrassed him at all. She had revealed him, shown him who he really was beneath the expensive suits and professional ambitions. And for the first time in years, he was proud of what he saw. The woman walking beside him wasn't just his mother. She was his teacher, his inspiration, and his reminder that true success isn't measured by what you achieve, but by how you treat people along the way. Margaret had spent the evening feeling small and out of place in this elegant restaurant. Now, as they walked toward the exit, she felt like she'd belonged, not because she'd changed, but because she'd finally been seen for who she truly was. And as they stepped out into the Chicago night, Marcus made a silent promise to himself. He would never again be embarrassed by the woman who had given him everything. Instead, he would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of her love, her sacrifice, and her example. Because Margaret Sullivan hadn't just raised a successful son, she had raised a man who was finally ready to make her proud in return. The evening that had begun with shame and disappointment had ended with recognition and renewal. And as they walked home together, both mother and son knew that this was not an ending, but a beginning, the start of a relationship built on mutual respect, genuine pride, and the unshakable foundation of love that had always been there, waiting to be rediscovered. In the weeks that followed, Marcus would tell everyone who would listen about his mother, not just about her new job at Giovanni's, but about her character, her sacrifices, and her unwavering belief in the power of kindness. He would frame the newspaper article that appeared the following week about Antonio Rivera's story of redemption and the woman who made it possible. The article, titled "From Streets to Success," Local chef credits Unknown Hero would feature a photograph of Antonio and Margaret together in Giovanni's kitchen. The reporter had interviewed other people whose lives Margaret had touched over the years, former coworkers who remembered her kindness, neighbors she'd helped during difficult times, even some of Marcus's childhood friends who recalled how welcoming she'd always been in their small apartment. Marcus would keep that article on his desk at work, and when colleagues asked about it, he would tell them the story with pride rather than embarrassment. He would talk about his mother's work ethic, her compassion, her ability to see potential where others saw problems. His colleagues would listen with genuine respect, many of them sharing their own stories about family members who had shaped their values, and Margaret would thrive in her new position at Giovanni's, bringing her natural warmth and genuine care. To everyone who walked through the doors, she would greet each guest like they were the most important person in the world. Remember their names and preferences, make them feel valued and welcomed. The restaurant's reputation for exceptional hospitality would grow, and Antonio would often credit Margaret's influence for the warm atmosphere that set Giovanni's apart from other upscale establishments. She would take those computer classes at the community college, enrolling in a program that Giovanni's partly sponsored for employee development. Margaret would discover that she had a natural aptitude for technology, especially the customer relationship management systems that helped her track guest preferences and special occasions. Her combination of technological skills and personal warmth would make her invaluable to the restaurant's operations. Within 6 months, Antonio would promote her to guest relations manager, a position created specifically for her unique talents. She would oversee the training of new hostesses, develop customer service protocols, and become the face of Giovanni's hospitality program. The shy, uncertain woman who had felt out of place in an upscale restaurant would become one of its most essential employees, but most importantly, they would rebuild their relationship on a foundation of honesty, respect, and appreciation. Marcus would learn to see his mother not as someone to manage or be embarrassed by, but as someone to learn from and admire. He would start incorporating her values into his professional life, treating colleagues and clients with the same genuine respect she showed everyone she met. He would discover that being known as someone who valued people over profit, who treated everyone with dignity regardless of their position, actually enhanced his reputation rather than diminishing it. Clients would comment on his authentic approach, his ability to build real relationships rather than just transactional partnerships. His career would flourish not despite his mother's influence, but because of it. And Margaret would learn that her worth wasn't determined by her son's opinion of her, but by the lives she had touched, the difference she had made, and the example she continued to set every single day. The confidence she gained from her success at Giovanni's would spill over into every aspect of her life. She would walk taller, speak with more assurance, and finally see herself as others had always seen her, as a woman of substance and value. The boy who had once been embarrassed by his mother's kindness had grown into a man who was finally proud to be her son, and the woman who had spent her life lifting others up had finally found someone who was ready to lift her up in return. It was in every sense a story of recognition, not just of Margaret by Antonio and the restaurant full of strangers, but of a son finally seeing his mother clearly, and a mother finally seeing her own worth reflected in the eyes of someone who mattered. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. There were still moments when Marcus caught himself falling into old patterns, still times when Margaret questioned whether she truly belonged in her new world. But they worked through those moments together, building a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. Margaret would often think back to that night at Giovanni's, remembering how small and insignificant she had felt when Marcus first expressed his embarrassment. Now she understood that the problem had never been with hurt, had been with his inability to see her clearly. And once that barrier was removed, everything else had fallen into place. The story would become a favorite in their family. Told and retold at holiday gatherings and special occasions, Marcus would always speak with wonder about the moment when Antonio emerged from the kitchen, how everything had changed in an instant. Margaret would talk about the importance of treating everyone with kindness, never knowing whose life you might touch or how your actions might ripple outward into the world, and in the end, that recognition changed everything. It changed how they saw each other, how they saw themselves, and how they moved through the world. The simple act of one person acknowledging another's worth had transformed not just a single evening, but the entire trajectory of their relationship. Years later, when Marcus had children of his own, he would tell them stories about their grandmother, not just about her success at Giovanni's, but about her character, her values, her unwavering belief in the power of kindness. He would teach them to see service work as honorable, to treat everyone with respect regardless of their job or status, to understand that true success is measured not by what you achieve but by how you treat people along the way. And Margaret would become not just a grandmother but a role model, showing her grandchildren through her own example what it means to live with grace, dignity, and compassion. The woman who had once been seen as an embarrassment would become the foundation upon which an entire family built their values. It was a legacy that would extend far beyond that single evening at Giovanni's, rippling outward through generations, touching lives in ways that Margaret could never have imagined when she first chose to help a young homeless man behind a diner on a cold Chicago night. The recognition she received that evening wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning, the start of a new chapter in which she finally understood her own worth and the profound impact of her choices. And that understanding would change everything for her, for Marcus, and for everyone whose lives they would touch in the years to come.